In our sermon series, The Beginning. When we started this series, I wasn't sure how far we were going to go through the book of Genesis, but I feel that this Sunday will be a good stopping point for us as we celebrate Easter next week. I honestly wish I could have taken some more time on some of these chapters and topics, but I want to be obedient to the Spirit, and I feel the Spirit saying that this is the place where we should be stopping and moving on to something else. My prayer is that the Lord has, through this series, has opened your eyes to the truth of His Word, especially as we have looked at God's creation and spent a lot of time in the beginning of Genesis in His creation account. And hopefully you have begun training yourself to have a biblical worldview, looking at everything in our world through the lenses of God's Word instead of the secular worldview that you have been trained to have since you were born. Recently, God has been breaking through some of the enemy's lies. I'm going to call them the enemy's lies. For instance, virtually all scientists now believe that the universe had a beginning, that it's no longer a belief that it was this eternal, always existed universe, that it didn't always exist. This makes a very strong argument for me to believe in a divine creator then. Because whatever begins to exist has to have a cause, right? Therefore, there must be a cause behind the existence of the universe. So what kind of cause can bring something like the universe into existence? I just kind of have a little tiny picture right there. But that cause, in order for a universe to be created, the thing that caused that had to be something that was transcendent because it existed apart from its created universe. It must have been eternal because it existed before physical time was even created. It must be immaterial or spirit because it existed before anything physical was even created. It must have been powerful because of the created work that it created. It must have been smart because of the precision of the creation that we see. And it must have been caring because it created such a wonderful habitat for its creation to exist in. It must have been personal because it created beings like us. Now, as I go through all these things that it must have been, it made me just stop for a second. Are you kind of putting it together, all of those things that I just listed, that it must have been in order to create what we have, the existence of what we have? Transcendent, spirit, eternal, powerful, smart, loving, unique. You see in the writing? That's the perfect description of the God of the Bible, right? And science, it just everything. If you just look deeper, God has fingerprints everywhere of who He is and His goodness. I've shown so many points just through these 3 months of intersections between God's Word and science. I mean, if you can't see the handiwork of a divine creator by looking just at nature, when you go out in nature, then I challenge you to take a deeper dive into the complexity of the human body. Secular science would tell you that we are an accident, that we are, after over eons and eons of time, our super complex bodies and our perfectly inhabitable world just happened over time. Okay? The Bible tells us that we are beautifully and wonderfully made by a loving creator. Think about this. On the back of your eye, I think I have a picture. Okay? Got an itch, sorry. On the back of your eye, hopefully that picture, I was kind of worried because some people have eye phobias. But anyway, on the back of your eyeball, there's a 1 square inch space called the retina. It contains 137 million light-sensitive cells. I want to make sure you heard that. 137 million light-sensitive cells, all wired to your brain. I can't imagine hooking up 137 million connections into 1 square inch. 1 square inch. The eyeball is so complex that when you walk into a room and you look all around, in less than a second, your eyeball picks up all the information, sends it to your brain, and your brain tells you what you're seeing. And you can respond to it. In less than a second, it reads it. Have you ever, I told you I play baseball, I love baseball. If you ever watch a game, they are throwing, some people throw 90 to 100 miles an hour, and they have less than a second to see a ball and hit a ball with a stick. Don't tell me baseball's doesn't take talent. Okay, in less than a second, your brain is processing it and going and giving you the information so that you can do what you need to do and react. It's absolutely insane. The average person has 50 trillion cells in their body. The DNA from your entire body would only fill, if you took out every DNA out of all of your cells, you would only fill 2 tablespoons. Okay? That's how many cells. But get this. If you would take all the DNA out of one cell and somehow, since they're so small to fit in 2 tablespoons, and you tied them together, they would stretch 6 feet long in one cell of your body. One cell of your body, 6 feet long. Do you know if you took out every cell and took all the DNA that fills 2 tablespoons and somehow you tied them together because they're so small, you tied them together, do you know how far it would stretch? To the moon and back 5 million times. That's all of your cells in your body made up of all of your genetic code. Okay? That if someone took the time to type out the code in just your DNA, okay, that incredibly complex code that makes you who you are, okay, that makes you who you are, okay, you would have enough books to fill the Grand Canyon on just your code 40 times. The probability of your DNA coming out of a swamp, out of nothingness, out of just by chance, your DNA, how complex it is and everything, the chance of that happening is 1 in 10 to the 19,000th power. That's 19,000 zeros, if you don't know that. 19,000 zeros. That's the probability that that happened. But that's what science would tell you is the more trustworthy source for your life. Like, that's how it happened. We are uniquely created, but understand this, we are a copy of 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 a copy, because we are all a copy, not the exact same thing, but our genetics all are copies of copies coming down from Adam, the original creation. So I want you to kind of just in your mind picture this, because I think it's really important that you understand this, because we have to do some science killing today. Or maybe not killing, maybe some re-educating of yourself. Okay, so Adam, God created Adam, and I want you to just think that God said that Adam was very good. Like, mankind was very good. So you're talking about, I don't know if you can say perfection, but it was close enough. Okay, so I know the best way I can say this is Adam was like Captain America. If you ever watch any of those movies, like impenetrable, doesn't get sick, lives forever, never ages, just a specimen physically. Okay, like perfect, okay? And God formed Adam out of the dust of the earth, and Adam wasn't born. Adam was made full grown, okay? So this is Adam, never sick. He's perfect. He has every ounce of the DNA code that you could possibly have. Any trait was in Adam, okay? Tall, short, heavy, skinny, dark hair, black, white, every possible genetic variation trait was inside of Adam. Okay? And so when Adam has kids, they get passed on to Adam's kids, okay? And he could have, his kids could be of any of those variations, right? We have some of our kids, Megan and I make jokes that William has her feet, Mackenzie has my feet. William has has her dad's hairline, has all these different things, and so William has all these different things, our kids, we talk about that because it's a random throwing of the dice of what the genetic is going to be of children, right? So with Adam, he had every sort of variability. So it's very likely that Adam's kids could have been every shade of the rainbow of color spectrum, okay? I know that our world tells us, I think it's really important, it's not really a part of my sermon, but it's really important to understand this, that there is only one race. Understand that. There's one race. And there's this lie, even a Christian lie that the people that are black-skinned are because they lived in Africa. That's garbage. Absolute garbage. It's simple genetics. God created people, and you get the melanin from your skin that tells you how dark or light you're going to be. I am not white. I don't have a white wall around here, but I am not white color, okay? But that's what the world tells me. My best friends, some of my best friends who are black, their skin is not black, it's brown. Some are darker, okay? But it's all about the melanin in your skin, okay? And depending on who your parents are and stuff like that, it shows you which line you're going to go. So, at some point, Adam and Eve are probably in the middle, I would guess. Somewhere, light brown, or medium brown, whatever, I don't care, in the brown. Okay, but when you start born and you start only marrying one skin color, what happens? You keep going down that road and your skin continues, your kid's skin gets darker and darker and darker and darker and darker. Okay, what happens if you throw, or the vice versa, if you only marry within your community of who look the same as you and all that stuff, what color is your skin going to be? White, right? If it's white, or if it's dark, okay? But if your family's all white and then you marry an African American, what color is your kid's skin color going to be? Brown again. You're going to get brown entered into it. Now your family's got brown back into it, okay? So it's all genetics. It 100% is genetics. Okay, so now you, okay? We are copies of copies, 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 copies. We wonder why we get sick so easily, okay? The further you get from the original, the more problems you're going to have, okay? So our bodies get sick very easily because we are so far removed from superior Adam, okay? God's creation, every generation, okay? That's why we have more cancers. That's why we have more situations with sicknesses and illnesses and have greater effects of all of that because we are further and further removed from Adam. All right? But I wish I was taught this in school. I really wish I was taught this in school to really focus. I think a whole class should just be on genetics and DNA and having a focus because it really opens my eyes that our world is not, we're not all different for no matter what race or color or creed you are. We're not different. We are one race. We are one race. And we all, it's just a shade of melanin. It's a shade of melanin. Went on that soapbox. Okay? Today our goal, though, is to get through the major highlights from Genesis 6 and 9, the flood. I know this story comes from many skeptics, comes with many skeptics, but maybe maybe that's you this morning. What if I told you, though, that almost every culture on earth has a great flood story? Almost every culture on earth has a great flood story. Now, why? Why would every culture have a great flood story? Because it was passed down through generations of the one family that survived it. Okay? One family. It's not different flood stories. It's one family passed it down to their kids, to their kids, to their kids, their kids. And we know that through time, stories get messed up. All right? But one family and their kids, their sons, the 3 sons of Noah passed it on, and their kids, and their kids, and their kids, and their kids. That's why we have it all over the world, because it was a story coming from one family. I suspect that the image in our head of the flood story may be some cute childlike art, and I have a picture of it, artwork with many pairs of animals on top of a boat. I can assure you the story is not cute. The story is not cute, and most of the Sunday school stuff that we were taught as kids doesn't do the actual flood's account justice. Because Adam's rebellion against God, all human beings are born separated from God and bent towards evil and sin. We talked about that last week. Even last week we covered that Cain murdered his brother Abel, just one generation removed from the fall in the garden. Just one generation, already murdering. And not murdering a stranger, murdering your brother. Human culture rapidly became corrupt until the earth was filled with violence and evil. That's what God's word tells us. A question I have struggled with for most of my life is, why did God choose this pathway, though? Why did God choose to destroy all of mankind? We know that the flood was a judgment of sin, but what could the people of the pre-flood world have done that God or done that was so horrendous that God would just decide to delete everything? Just delete, restart. What could they have actually been doing? Because I'm thinking, like, why hasn't he killed us all now? Because I can't see it's much worse than it is now. But that was God's plan. So why? Why would he destroy everything with the exception of Noah and his family? Well, there's something that they don't cover in the kids' Sunday school lessons. At least I don't remember it as a child. It comes in Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 through 6. So let's start there. Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 through 6. Then the people began to multiply on the earth, and the daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw the beautiful women and took any they wanted as their wives. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they are only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth. For whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. The Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth and saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. So the Lord was sorry he had ever made them and put them on the earth. It broke his heart. The evil that filled the earth wasn't just from mankind. According to many theologians, the sons of God, that terminology refers to angels who rebelled against God and who were cast out of heaven with Satan. Okay? That's important to understand that. So we're talking about evil angels cast out. We call them demons, whatever you want to do. And they probably possessed human bodies, slept with human women, and gave birth to Nephilim, who roam the earth as ancient super creatures, super-powered creatures, hybrids, that we know as giants. Goliath, descendant of Nephilim. Okay? So these humongous creatures, superpowered, who were the heroes and warriors at that time, that comparative to men, we would bow down in fear and surrender. The term sons of God in the Old Testament and all of its other occurrences always refers to angels. This interpretation also helps us understand some New Testament passages like this one in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 through 5. For God did not spare even the angels who sinned. He threw them into hell, in gloomy pits of darkness, where they are being held until the day of judgment. And God did not spare the ancient world except for Noah and the 7 others in his family. Noah warned the world of God's righteous judgment, so God protected Noah when he destroyed the world of ungodly people with a vast flood. See, this passage describes a very drastic judgment upon these fallen angels. For this sin, these angels were sent to the pit of darkness, and their offspring was wiped off the face of the earth by the flood. Okay, so now we're getting a little better picture here. But the humans were not innocent in this. They contaminated themselves by sleeping with these fallen angels and then bearing their offspring. They even began worshiping these Nephilim. These famous warriors were the first stars. Okay, we look at our society and we have all these stars, these Hollywood stars or movie stars or sports stars, and they could say anything. And we go follow them hook, line, and sinker. We go follow them. Oh, yes, okay, yes. Yes, all right. What do you think, Katy Perry? Okay, yeah, I'll do whatever you want. Taylor Swift, what? Okay, yeah. Yeah, whatever you say. And these Nephilim had become that in the culture. Whatever they said, because they were these heroes and they were giants and they were powerful and these major gladiators, whatever you say, we'll follow you. They're the stars. And the Nephilim tempted the humans to follow evil, detestable practices. Because who were their fathers? The sons of God, demons. We see these same practices today. It should not surprise us that with the total rejection of God back then, it led to these bizarre sexual sins and an outbreak of evil everywhere, which is the same thing that's happening today. When you take and remove God out of this, God out of the equation, what happens? Sin everywhere. Our world is the way it is because we've removed God. We've allowed God to be removed from every aspect of our culture in our lives. This teaching makes sense and would explain the extraordinary extent God had to go to wipe out the sin and start all over again. The evil of those days was so great that God needed to destroy the earth and its inhabitants with a worldwide flood while saving land animals and the 8 members of Noah's family on a ship that God had Noah and his sons construct. Genesis chapter 6, verse 8 through 9 says, "But Noah found favor with the Lord." This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on the earth at the time, and he walked in a close fellowship with the Lord. Woo! The only, I don't know if you caught that, the only blameless man on the earth. What an honor. Notice some of these traits that the word highlights here about Noah. That he was righteous, that he did what was right in God's sight. That he was blameless. Okay, that he was not at fault. Didn't mean he was perfect, but that he was blameless for the things that were going on around him. And that he was close to God. He was walking with God. He knew God intimately. Our world is getting very similar to the days of Noah. Jesus even tells us to watch out, for the days of Noah are going to come back again. The days of Noah, and I think our world is getting very, 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 very close to it, if it's not already there, of the days of Noah, and God needs some people like Noah. He needs some Noahs who are righteous, that are blameless, that are close with him. And I wonder, I ask you this question, how many of these qualities are ones that you share with Noah in your life? Righteous, blameless, close with God? Because I think the Lord is looking for a bunch of ark builders in this world. Not to build a boat to save your family only and a bunch of animals, but I think God's looking for ark builders to save as many people before the end, where we fill it with people. Are you willing to be his ark builder? Now, I know a lot of people struggle with how primitive man could have built this such a huge boat, and they wrestle with this. How could this possibly be? How could he have done this? Genesis 6, 14 through 15. Let's just read about this boat real fast. "Build a large boat," God said, "from cypress wood and waterproof it with tar inside and out. Then construct decks and stalls throughout the interior. Make the boat 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high." We did the math for you, so don't worry about this. 1.88 million cubic feet. That's how big it is. Maybe you don't know how big that is. Let me just explain that to you. You still remember Diane showed up the OCC with the trailer that had the semi and the trailer that had all the gifts inside of it? 450 of those semi-trailers could fit inside the ark. 450 of those, stacked all together, could fit inside. You could fit at least, they estimate, at least 120,000 animals inside of that boat. 120, at least. That's massive. How did he build it? Explain it to me. How did he build it? Well, first, let me just tell you. It took 120 years. Let's just start right there. 120 years to build this boat. Second, we don't know what tools that Noah had. Most of us have this evolutionary view or an evolutionary influence view of history. Okay, we take what we learn in school, and it has impacted us. That secular worldview has impacted our way of interpreting everything. Okay, many believe that Noah must have been some primitive man using primitive stone tools, because that's what we were taught. When God made man, man was not dumb. Get that out of your mind. Man was not dumb. Adam was not some, almost said that. Man was not dumb. Stop myself. Thank you, Jesus. Genesis chapter 4, verse 21 tells us that just within a few generations, people were making musical instruments. Okay, so already we can see that they created those musical instruments that we enjoy. They were already creating them just a couple generations after Adam was born. Okay, we have this perception that the further back we go, the dumber people were. The Bible tells us that the early people lived about 900 years. Literally, not figuratively, or it's not like the calendar was different or anything like that. That's a lie. 900 years. That's how long they lived originally, 900 years. And Adam was pre-programmed straight from the hand of God. Okay, he was made out of the dust. God breathed life into him. He was an adult, fully adult. Okay, so all the things that we learn as a child, God had to pre-program him to have all that information. Okay, he could walk, he could talk, he could name the animals. He probably had incredible amounts of this pre-programmed information inside of him that, and what he didn't know after walking with God for 100 years in the garden or however long he was there, talking with God, he learned it from God. Learned all this information from God. Even after the flood, it still says that people live 400 years. So a lot of that knowledge must have been retained even after the flood. Today, about the time we understand what we think is everything, we're like 80 years old. And then our mind begins to slip and begin losing all the information that we had. Okay? How smart would you be if you lived 900 years and you actively tried to learn stuff throughout that time period? I think you'd be pretty smart. Okay? Many civilizations after the flood arose quickly. We see that. They arose quickly. If you are really smart people like Noah and his sons, which you'd believe Noah and his sons were very smart, and they had 15 to 20 kids each, estimating, they're going to then disperse after the flood and build their own civilizations quite easily because of all the knowledge they have and all the workers that they had. And if you gave them the time and their knowledge that they already had, they would figure out what they needed to do to build a civilization. They'd figure how to dig up iron and figure out how to melt it and make it into tools. Okay, it's almost like Gilligan's Island. I know some of these kids have no idea what we're talking about, but it's almost like Gilligan's Island. They had all the information, they had all the knowledge, and in that show, they got shipwrecked on an island, and what do? The professor and they all made like a civilization for themselves out of the resources that they had. That's how all these great ancient civilizations just arose out of nowhere. There really isn't much evidence for teaching that all men were hunters and gatherers and cavemen and eventually became civilized. Sure, some people probably throughout all the history probably said, you know what, I don't want to be this. I'm going to go off the reservation and be kind of like the version of Amish. Okay, and I'm going to go off, and we see that. We have tribes all around the world right now, tribes that are in rainforests and in Africa and places that they don't want anything to do with it. And so they just kind of stay somewhat primitive. But look at Adam. Okay, what was Adam's sons' occupations? Farmers. It's still a job today. So it's not like they were hunters or gatherers. They were farmers. Okay? And so it's not like they were like with stones and in the cave drawings and like banging rocks like we see on TV, all that stuff. They were farmers. See, there must have been early technological advanced civilizations before or after the flood. Now, I'm not talking about computers or anything like that, but they must have had the ability to do things that we might think is impossible that they were able to do back in that time. There's actual proof of how smart man used to be in archaeological records. I have a picture, Cindy. This bell in this picture, they found this bell. And this bell is dated to be as old as the flood. Okay? Dated to be as old as the flood. You know where they found it? Wrapped in a block of coal. Do you know how coal is made? Okay, it's from vegetation and stuff that is the same way fossils are made, except vegetation, not an animal. Okay, and so like it was wrapped around and stuff, and so this was, what they believe is this was a bell that was made pre-flood. And what is that made out of? Metal. And it's been shaped. And our whole life we've been told that they're cavemen with sticks and rocks, and they go kill animals with sticks and rocks and this and stuff. But at that same time, they're able to make bells, and they found iron ore in the ground and melted it and figured out how to make it into beautiful bells. By the time Noah was building the ark, who knows what sort of knowledge had been accumulated and what sophisticated technologies had been developed already at that time because of the relationship that they had with God and what God had pre-programmed into Adam. And remember, we don't know how ancient people built the massive stone structures that we have found all over the earth. We have no idea how they built some of the stuff in South America. That there's one stone that I read about, one stone that's so massive that not a single crane in this world could ever pick it up. There's not a crane in the world that could pick up that stone, not by a long shot. But somehow ancient man was able to build this. Or you know the pyramids. We've had this. No, I don't think aliens built the pyramids. Okay? But you know all this. I mean, like, how did they do it? How were they able to do that? We have no idea. But clearly it tells me that they weren't as dumb as we make them out to be. That our world has lied to us with a secular worldview, that they were these dumb, primitive people that had no idea how to do all these things. When really, clearly, I think God had given them the abilities. Genesis chapter 4, verse 22 says, just a few generations after Adam, we read, And as for Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. Again, this is before Noah was born. Okay, and she was already they were already a craftsman in bronze and iron. If they were using bronze and iron, then by the time Noah had gotten alive and God wanted him to build the ark, they may have developed a very sophisticated use for metals. See, friends, it is important for us to have a biblical world view. And you can't take everything that our world tells us, because we're missing out on the truths of God's word and the revelation of, man, God knew what he was doing. God knows what he's doing. There is an explanation to a lot of the things that God does that makes sense. Now, I do believe that God definitely gave Noah an upgrade on his engineering degree on how to build the ark and taught him how to do some things that I don't think men at that time knew how to do. First of all, I definitely know he gave him engineering upgrades because they didn't have any boats. Okay, it hadn't rained. I don't think they had boats at that time, definitely not of that size, how big that is. But God created this. I think God gave maybe Noah a little bit of an upgrade. Genesis chapter 6, verse 17 through 21 says, "Look, I'm about to cover the earth with with a flood that will destroy every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will die. But I will confirm my covenant with you. So enter the boat, you and your wives and your sons and their wives. Bring a pair of every kind of animal, a male and a female, into the boat with you and keep them alive during the flood." So it's really important that was part of his job, was to keep them alive during that time period. Make sure you know that. "Pairs of every kind of birds and every kind of animal and every kind of small animal that scurries along the ground will come to you and to be kept alive." Will come to you. Again, remember, Adam didn't have to go pick them all up. Or not Adam, Noah. Noah didn't have to come pick them all up. They came to Noah. "And be sure to take on board enough food for your family and for all the animals." Okay, so really quickly. Kinds of animals. That's what it talks about. Kinds of animals. The biblical concept of created kind probably most closely corresponds to family level. The family level in the hierarchy of the animal family. We've talked about that when I talked about dinosaurs. A good rule of thumb is that if two things can breed together and have an offspring, they are of the same kind, created kind. There can be a tremendous amount of variation within that. We have all sorts of canines, wolves, dingoes, coyotes, jackals, domestic dogs. Okay, and so all you need is the top of the line one, and all those genetic variations can come through the breeding. That's why we have all these different types of animals, because it starts and it's all built into their DNA. Okay, the way we have all these different types of dogs and stuff, like we call them pure blood dogs, they're actually mutants that we have created. They're not the real dogs. Like your beautiful poodle is a vicious mutant. Okay? It's something that was never meant to be, that we created on our own. Okay? By doing genes and trying to make it out. Okay? God had, all you need is a couple of animals, two of the kind, and you can make all the other kinds. And that's how we got what we have today. Okay? So recent studies estimate the total number of living and extinct kinds of land animals, again, this is an estimation, and flying creatures that he would have needed to cover probably was 1,400. Only 1,400. That's not that many. Okay, remember I told you that boat could hold 120,000. Okay? Scientists then have calculated the number of animals on the ark would probably only need to be around, because of kinds, 6,744 animals. Again, it's not this insane idea, because I know that for many people it's like, how in the world could that boat have held all of those animals? Well, it's only 6,744 animals. And God is not stupid. Okay? God's not going to send a full-grown elephant to be the thing on the boat. He's brilliant. He's not going to have a full-grown elephant that's going to need so much food and is going to, excrement so much on the boat. He's going to send probably a very young elephant who's not ready to mate, who's not going to be ready to mate until after the boat is done, and then it's not going to require a lot of food, and it's not going to be a lot of cleanup, because God is that brilliant. I know in our mind we're all thinking, how can you have those big giraffes or the big full-grown alligators and all these different things? God's not dumb. He is brilliant beyond measure. Genesis 7, verse 4. 7 days from now, I will make the rains pour down on the earth, and it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights until I have wiped from the earth all the living things I have created. Then skip to verse 10. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth. When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the second month, all the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. The rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights. Okay? Again, this is the first time that they've ever seen rain. The water had never fallen down. Okay? It had never fallen down. But God opened it up and it rained for 40 days. And then he says he opened in an eruption the waters from below. Okay? Huge amounts of water came up from the ground. It wasn't just from the sky. It came up from below as well and raised the levels, underground waters. And they were on the ark for about a year. They ended up being on the ark for about a year before they were able to get off and walk on dry ground. 1 year on that boat, having to keep those animals alive and well kept for a year on that boat. Now, question is there any evidence of this massive flood happening other than that every culture across the world has a story about the flood? Well, yes, we talked about it with the dinosaurs. Okay, the fossils that we have dinosaurs are perfectly fossils, and it makes the most sense that they came because a giant tidal wave of waters erupting from below, covering them with sediment, burying them with tons and pounds of waters that caused all these massive fossils. Okay? Makes total sense to me. But there's more. There's a big study done on the Sahara Desert, and they found that the Sahara Desert only grows, the Sahara Desert actually grows 4 miles every single year. It expands to get bigger 4 miles every year, and it's currently 1,300 miles wide. Using those figures, they could conclude then that the desert, by doing reverse calculations, that was probably 4,000 years old. The desert was 4,000 years old. If the earth was millions and millions of years old, the desert would be much bigger than that. The Bible says that God created everything 6,000 years ago, and then 4,400 years ago, 4,400, there was a massive flood that covered and destroyed everything. It's really hard to have a desert under the flood, right? It's really hard to have a desert when water is covering it. So just based on what the Bible says, the oldest desert can't be older than 4,400 years, which is exactly what this study of the Sahara Desert came to the conclusion, that the desert was 4,000 years old, which is the same amount of time a flood happened and left, and the climate changed. Hence, having a desert. I love when science helps prove God's word. I love it. I hope you love it too. I grew up in Palm Springs. I didn't grow up the whole time there, but I was born in Palm Springs, California. And in that area, I love going out there to visit. And when I go out there to visit, it's all a desert. And there's these huge mountains all around it. And when you drive through the desert, they have these gigantic boulders all over the desert. And these boulders are all perfectly smooth and rounded. It's like when you ever go to a moving stream or a lake or a river, and you pick up one of those really smooth, that the water has smoothed them over time. And there's these gigantic boulders all over the desert. And I'm like, where in the world did these boulders come from? They look like they belong at the bottom of an ocean or the bottom of water. And as I saw them, and sure enough, in that area, they have found countless amounts of fossilized shells or sea life and all these different things because it used to be underwater. There's even, like, if you look at the mountains that are huge there, you can see lines where the water used to be on the walls. And that's not just there. They've actually found ocean shells on top of Mount Everest. How did it get there? Well, they will tell you this. This is what they'll tell you. Well, when the mountains came crashing up out of the water at one point, it's still there. No, it's because the earth was covered by tons of water, and then it all went away, and the shells stayed up on top of there. Okay? Huge. Then we go move on to the Grand Canyon as I'm coming to close here. Then we go to the Grand Canyon. Where? Well, Grand Canyon, what are you talking about? How does this have to do with the flood? It does. Science tells us that this amazing canyon was carved out by the Colorado River. We've all been taught that. This is an amazing thing. The Colorado River carved it out. Let me tell you something. Colorado River starts at 3,000 feet above sea level. Okay? The top of the Grand Canyon is 7,000 feet above sea level. Tell me how something that's 3,000 feet, water cannot go uphill. Water can scientifically not go uphill. Okay, the top of the surface of the Grand Canyon is 7,000 feet. The bottom of the Colorado River is 3,000 feet. Okay, it would have to be up here for it to, over millions of years, carve out to get down to here. Okay, to go downhill. Impossible. Okay, the layers removed in the canyon are an estimated of 130,000 miles of cubic dirt that are gone, removed out of that canyon. Where's it all gone? All those layers were laid down very quickly. Science says that they were laid down very quickly. There's no erosion marks between the layers that are laid down. It was all laid down at one time, not laid down slowly over millions and millions of years. When a river carves out a canyon, it will form a delta. Just like at the bottom of the Mississippi River, at the end of the Gulf, there's this huge delta where all of the soil and sediment has been collecting at the Gulf. All the sediment has to go somewhere. So where is all the sediment in this delta at the Colorado River? For all this soil that's been removed. It's not there. It's not at the end, not even close. And if it was going to do this over millions and millions of years, we would find this huge amounts of settlement, but it's not there. So if all the layers were laid down at the same time, what would have had to have taken for all of that sediment and to form this unbelievable massive canyon? What would have had to take in order to do that? For water to go uphill? I can tell you. Tons and tons and tons of water, all flowing so fast and so hard that it even defies nature. Okay? And we see that sometimes in floods, right? We see that. And that water that was all came out through the canyon, it's still here today. It's in the oceans. Okay? God separated the lands. When he removed all the water, what God did was he separated the lands so that the water would run off of the lands and back into the oceans, creating the oceans and stuff like that. God allowed that to happen so that the lands could dry after the flood. Okay? Pangea, we put that up there. I know I loved this stuff when I was a kid, and I apologize. But Pangea, all of the continents form together. I don't know if you guys noticed that there's this beautiful connection between all the continents where they look like they were together at one point. Now, if God was going to separate the lands in order for the water to run off, he would break them off like we see today, but at one point they would have been together. Okay, which they look like they fit. There's actually mountain ranges in the United States that match up with mountain ranges in Europe. Okay, like they went together at one point, and then something happened that separated all of them. Okay, there's same structure, same elements, same everything, and they were separated. And so God separated it so all of the waters could get drained off of it. And have we ever seen floods? What happens at the end of a flood when a flood leaves, and at the end of a heavy rain, and all the water goes to the end of the road? Okay, end of the road. What happens to that sediment? Okay, it just erodes and erodes at the very end. At the part where it's flowing down out of it, it erodes. Just kind of like what I would think when the flood happened and it drains off, what the Grand Canyon would make. I don't know. It's a thought. It makes sense to me. Maybe not you. Okay, I know I've covered a lot. And I just want to let you know I left out a lot. Believe it or not. I left out a lot, and I left out way too much. I actually am going to cover a little bit of the flood during Easter, but I want to end this message in this way. I want to read Genesis chapter 7, verse 16. It says this: "A male and a female of each kind entered, just as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord closed the door behind them." Now, I want you to just think about that verse for a bit, just for a second, because I've gone long. Yes, the door was huge to shut the boat, but I can tell you this for a fact. What we know about Noah, and he just built that boat, he didn't need God to shut the boat. He had the technology to shut that boat. He already had it designed to where he could pull that door shut. But for some reason, God shut it. So why did God shut the door? I think God had to shut the door because I don't think Noah and his family could do it. No, I'm not talking about anything to do with their strength or the ability to get that door shut. Not like something was happening, like a movie might make it seem like something blocked it, or they're not going to get the door shut and they're all going to die. I'm not saying that. I think they couldn't do it because of their will and desire. Think about this. All their friends, their neighbors, and their relatives were going to die in that flood. They were all going to die, and shutting the door sealed their fate and ensured that everything outside would die. Their lives, everything would be dead. How would you feel? Could you do that? Could you shut the door on everybody that you know and love outside of this world and just shutting the door on them? Plus, not even saying this fact, but they were going to be alone for, well, we figured out it's a year, but like they didn't know how long they were going to be on this boat with these animals. And like making that commitment to be alone on that boat, trusting in God. Or how about this? Every wife of Noah's sons, their whole family and existence was about to die. Their fathers, their brothers, their sisters, every one of Noah's sons' wives, their families were about to be wiped out and annihilated. They would have to hear their cries banging on the door. Let me in! Let us in! Little kids being swept away. Nieces and nephews, grandchildren. God sealed them in because this was His judgment. This was His will. How they must have all hurt for that entire time being on that boat. Not only did they have to endure the storm outside of the boat, but they had to endure the terrible storm going on inside of their own hearts, inside their lives, inside their hearts and their minds. All the while stuck on a boat taking care of God's animals. Can't imagine that storm they had to endure. How many of us, I believe, can relate to Noah and his family. Not that we have to build a boat or anything like that, but of having to endure a terrible storm in our life. Having to endure a storm that God allows us to go through that we don't want, but we're willing to be obedient and trust God through. And Noah and his family had to do that. And I know a lot of times in the midst of those storms that we have in our life, we think they're too great to get through. And we kind of hold on to them. And we're like, okay, God, you gave me this, so I'm going to fight through it. And God's like, no, I just want you to trust me and let me carry that weight. I'll shut the door for you. I'll shut the door for you. I'll seal you in. Because this is my will. This is my will. Will you trust me? I'll get you through this storm. I want you to go through this. This is me allowing you to go through this so you can learn to trust me and love me even to greater depths. See, Isaiah 40 verse 12 says, who else held the oceans in his hand? Go ahead, Ben. Go ahead and come forward. Who else holds the ocean in your hand? So I'm going to do a little demonstration. Hold out your hand real fast as we're done here. Hold out your hand. Now look at your palm. Okay, God says, who else held the oceans in his hand? Look at your palm. You can hold that much water. God can hold the oceans in his palm of his hand. 3/4 of the earth is covered in water. You're talking about 912,500 cubic miles of water that God can hold in his hands. Then he goes up and he says, who has measured off the heavens with his fingers? Now everyone hold your hand up like this. This is how you measure off fingers. Okay, measure off with your fingers. God's measuring off the heavens, the stars in the galaxy in the sky. Okay, just I want you to picture that. This is the God that we are. You can put your hands down now. This is the God that we're talking about. Imagine just the nighttime sky and God just putting everything up there. Here's what your immeasurably great God says about himself, that he can hold the oceans in his hand. He measures the sky with his fingers. And that's how big he is and how great he is. So what problems do you think that God can't help you through? Friends, there is nothing that he can't help you through. There are no storms in this life that he cannot help you through. Your problem at work, he can help you with. Your problem with your marriage, he can help you with. Your problem with your kids, he's got you. He's got lots of kids with lots of problems. Your problem with your finances, he can help you. Your problem with your physical limitations, the problem with your physical problems, illnesses, sicknesses, whatever, he's got you if you'll let him. Your sin issue, he's got you. Can you trust God is the question. How can we not? How can you not trust the God who is that big, but can also knit you together and did knit you together in your mother's womb? That was willing to put 137 million connections together in your eyeballs so you could see the wonder of his glory and all of his creation. That's how good he is. He wants to carry those storms for you if you'll let him. So we're gonna pray.